Welcome back to the channel. My name is Sherwin, and today in this video, I'll be going through the 3E framework which I use to guide all my buyers, be it whether they are buying for own stay or investment or a hybrid of both. So what is the 3E? The first E actually stands for entry price and exit strategy, which will be all I'll be talking about in this video today, because fundamentally, I think that is the most important E out of the three. The second E will be on efficiency, which we will touch on floor plan, unit selection, location and lease tenure. And the last E would be emotion, which is something that is very much overlooked in the market today. When it comes to entry and exit strategy, I've actually broken up into 5 different elements. The first would be affordability, because if you can't afford that, you can't purchase lah. And no point buying something where the money installment is so high that it stresses you out. The second would be price benchmark. Third would be transformation. Fourth would be demand, and lastly would be the supply of the area. So buying a home isn't just about the price tag, it's also about your affordability. How I calculate affordability, there's actually 3 portions which I'll usually use to advise my clients. The first would be how much can you purchase based on how much cash you have on hand, CPF in your OA, and lastly the max loan you can afford to take. Okay? Of course, if all this add up to become 2.5 million, I'll usually advise my clients to look at property way below 2.5 million, around the 2 million range as well, so that they can build a safety net. Second would be the monthly installment. You do not want to be in a scenario where your monthly installment stresses you out every month, because you do have to take into account whether you have any credit cards loan that you have to pay, car loan you have to pay, and any other miscellaneous payment. And then lastly, which I feel is important, would be your safety net. How I usually go about calculating safety net for my client, is if today you don't work, assuming you buy a property and don't work, do you have enough cash and CPF savings for the next 4 years to service the mortgage for the property? At least, the principal portion, because the interest portion you can always just rent out and cover that portion to ensure that you have no loss. Why 4 years, is because of the seller's stamp duty, which was recently increased by our government. It used to be 3 years. So assuming you buy something at 1 million and 4 years later you sell at 1 million, you do not have to pay any additional tax to the government, and the only portion which you are losing money is just the interest portion. But if you are renting it out, you are all covered. Okay? So next, after affordability, we have pricing benchmark. How do we determine the right price to enter? These are the 3 factors. Firstly would be historical price trend, not just in the project, but in the district as well. Secondly would be nearby comparable. For the same 2.5 million budget in this condo that I can purchase, what are the other things I can buy with similar attributes in terms of age and size? And lastly would be the new launch and resale price gap. Usually for new launch, there will be a premium of 15 to 30%, and if that gap is too wide, I will ask my owners to consider the resale in the surrounding instead. But there are instances where it is a reverse, where the resale owners are asking for prices that is very close to the new launch pricing. Let me give you an example. Botany at Dairy Farm and The Mist, they are just 1 MRT station apart. Sizes are similar, but if you look at the resale prices, or rather the resale asking price by the owners at Botany at Dairy Farm, they are looking at around 2,000 to 2,003 PSF. If you were to compare the Mist units for sale, the new launch, they are also asking around 2,000 to 2,003 PSF. So today, if you are a buyer, would you choose to buy something new or something second-hand in the resale market? Hence, this actually makes the Mist much more attractive. But this is just one of the example that I can give, but there are cases where resale are much more attractive. Okay? The third point for entry and exit strategy, right, would be transformation. The key question is the price that you are paying into today. Is it backed by future growth? And I always have this formula when it comes to transformation value, which is the transformation value equals to the impact of your transformation multiplied by the time taken for the transformation to happen. What do I mean by impact? Today, if they are building a community center within your vicinity versus they are building 60,000 BTO in the same area, which one, right, will give you a higher impact in financial sense in the future? Okay, the second one will be the time taken for transformation. Ask yourself this: are you buying in at the start of the transformation, in the midst of the transformation, or at the tail end of the transformation? Let me give you a very classic example. There's this condo in Tanjong Pagar called V on Shenton, which was sold in 2012 and 2013. And if you look at the article over here, right, that is the same time, right, where the government actually start announcing their plans for the Greater Southern Waterfront. Greater Southern Waterfront, the impact of transformation is very huge, right? But let's look at how V on Shenton performed. Out of the 60 over transactions, resale transactions over there, 47 of them actually lost money. And if you were to go to Property Guru, there's still a lot of owners trying to sell. So what exactly happened? The impact of the transformation is so huge that it should bring about tangible benefits for the owner there, but it did not materialize, right? Because during the announcement to the execution of Greater Southern Waterfront, the timeline is too long already. They are buying in way ahead of the transformation. They only start to launch the first BTO housing in that area this year, October 2025. And the expected completion of the entire project, right, goes way beyond 2040, which by then, if you look at V on Shenton, which is the 99 years project, right, how many years would have already passed? That is why when we talk about transformation as a gauge for how much you are willing to pay for it, right, always ask yourself, will I be able to hold the property long enough till I see the benefit? Or am I just paying for a premium where the impact or the time taken for this will never be realized for this property? So when analyzing housing demand, right, there are two key things to look at. One is the transaction volume, and second would be the demographics of the area. Historical transaction volume, both for the district and specific project, right, is a strong indicator of demand. If units are moving steadily and there's transaction volume, it always drives up the price. But if an area or a project is very stagnant, right, it will be very hard for you to sell in the future, or the price would not appreciate as much. Equally important would be the demographics. Are there many HDB flats reaching MOP based on the timeline you want to sell in the future? Are there reputable schools that will attract family? Or is the area more driven by investor? Or if you buy into a more mature area where the demographics or the age of the people there are older, they might not be thinking so much about upgrading, but rather downsizing. Understanding both transaction volume and demographics, right, will give you a clearer picture, not just whether the price you pay today is justifiable, but whether the demand will remain strong, right, in the future. Because if you buy in today's market and there's a lot of people buying, but in the future there's no one buying, then it don't make sense for you to pay a certain price tag to it, right? Okay, just an example, house on Handy, which is right behind Dhoby Ghaut MRT. There are 36 units trying to sell and they TOP about 3 years ago. But look at the number of transactions for the past 3 years. The transaction volume is 0. Do you think this is a healthy transaction volume? Okay, Of course, objective is different. If you're buying for rental, then it makes sense for you to enter. But if you're buying to flip, maybe you will want to reconsider. The last element that determines the right entry price and exit strategy would be the supply analysis. So supply is pretty straightforward. There's only two types of supply in the market. First is the new launch supply, and second would be the resale supply. The question which I always put across to my client, right, is how can this supply be replenished? For new launch supply, right, it is pretty easy to estimate because it is controlled by our government and it's either through government land sales or en bloc. But for resale supply, it's slightly harder because if there's no individual owner they are willing to sell or put their units in the market, the resale supply will always be low. And in today's market, right, more and more individual owners are holding back and selling their property even though they can fetch a good price because the replacement cost is high. So people usually buy in property nowadays for long term rather than flipping. Hence our resale supply, right, has actually reduced or tightened quite significantly. And how we can tell from that, right, will be from all the new launches that are launched recently, right. As long as they are in a good location and priced correctly, they are usually sold out very fast. And in this case, right, we have Chuan Park as an example. If you look at the nearby vicinity of Chuan Park, right, for the 3-bedroom that are around 10 years old or lesser, there's only 52 resale units for sale. Not considering any duplicates. I just do a quick search like this, there's 52. If we take duplicates into account, there might only be like 35 to 40 units for sale. Hence, right, during the first day of launch, Chuan Park actually sold 76% of their unit. That's why analyzing supply is critical to justify whether the price you pay today is justifiable and whether your property value, right, will hold in the future when you want to sell. That's it for the first E, entry price and exit strategy. For the next two videos, I'll be touching on the efficiency and the emotions when it comes to purchasing your property. Remember to like, share and subscribe my video.